You know, everyone loves a good, rise and grind story. Especially here in America. The late nights, the sacrifices, the promise that it's all going to pay off someday. My story is one of those. Except I was doing the grinding. And he was the one promising the payoff. But this isn't a story about sacrifice. It's about compound interest, and how sometimes, the quietest revenge is the one that costs the most. If you've ever had to build something on your own while someone else took the credit, hit the like button right now. We're getting into it. The cheap IKEA desk lamp hummed, casting a sickly yellow spotlight on the spreadsheets. It was 11:47 p.m. The only other sound in our small, two-bedroom apartment was the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of Sarah Chen's keyboard, cutting through the thin wallboard from the adjacent bedroom. Outside, the distant, mournful wail of a Puget Sound freight train served as the city's lullaby. Sarah didn't look up. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, and she was wearing the same oversized university hoodie she'd owned since college, a silent uniform for her current job, Chief Financial Officer of Sarah and Ethan, Inc. On the screen, the final numbers for the rental properties flashed green. $14.580 in capital gains. That number represented 8 months of her managing tenants, coordinating repairs, chasing late rent, and, tonight, painstakingly filing the annual tax forms, all while Ethan was networking. A key fumbled in the lock, followed by the soft, almost apologetic click of the front door closing. Ethan was home. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose, saving the spreadsheet with an aggressive double click. She walked out of the spare bedroom and into the kitchen, the scent of expensive, stale cologne hitting her first, something woody and European that cost more than their monthly utility bill. Ethan Hayes was leaning against the counter, still in his crisp, tailored suit. He looked less tired than wired. He smelled faintly of expensive liquor and ambition. "Hey," he said, the word clipped. He grabbed a bottle of alkaline water from the fridge. "I figured you'd be asleep. Big day tomorrow." "Big day for you." "Yes," Sarah said, picking up the suit jacket draped carelessly over a chair. She carefully peeled off a strand of long, blonde hair that wasn't hers. "The Founders' Day Gala. Did you finally close the pitch with the Danner Group?" Ethan took a long, exaggerated pull from the water bottle, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, already rehearsing his next move. "Close it, please. I owned the room. Sarah, the Danner guy practically promised me their next round of seed funding. They see me as a partner. A future." He paused, finally looking at her. "I need you to be my partner tomorrow night. Babe, I need you on your best behavior." Sarah folded the jacket, her voice measured. "I just finished the tax filing for both properties. Ethan, you owe me $4 for the WA assessment on the condo, plus the cost of the HVAC repair. Do you want to use the equity line? Or are you finally going to transfer some of your salary out of that future fund you keep talking about?" His expression soured, his face collapsing from CEO in training to annoyed husband. "God, Sarah, can we not do this? Tonight, the night before the most important event of my career? It's always about the money, isn't it? The properties? You're so tied up in the tangible that you can't see the bigger picture. I'm talking IPO. I'm talking generational wealth." He waved his hand dismissively toward the bedroom. "That $4 is peanuts compared to what's coming." Sarah set the jacket down, her shoulders squaring, her lips pressed together into a thin, white line, a sign she was swallowing words he wouldn't survive hearing. "Peanuts," she echoed softly. "Right. Well, those peanuts just paid the mortgage on the house your parents couldn't afford to keep. Those peanuts just covered the copay for the emergency appendectomy last month. I'm just trying to make sure the foundation doesn't crack while you build the penthouse." "Ethan." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's exactly it, isn't it? Foundation. I need a rocket ship. Sarah, not a foundation. We'll talk numbers next week. Just focus on tomorrow. Smile a lot. Don't talk finance. And please, wear the earrings I bought you. The ones that look expensive. It's about the look." He walked past her and into the master bedroom, the door clicking shut. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah stood there alone in the silent kitchen, The $14.580 capital gains number still burned into her retina. She walked back to her desk and clicked open the second monitor. It wasn't the tax forms this time. It was a digital map of downtown Seattle. And pinned to one specific, brightly lit FinTech office building, was a satellite view of Ethan Hayes's corner office. She reached for her phone. It was time to find out what, exactly, was in that future fund. Sarah locked the spare bedroom door. A tiny, almost childish act of defiance. But it felt crucial. The clock on her laptop read 1:05 a.m. Ethan would be asleep, medicated by his own self-importance and the couple of stiff whiskeys he'd put back at the networking event. She had maybe 4 hours before his pre-dawn, executive routine, started. She didn't need a password. That was the most painful part. Ethan's laptop required a biometric scan. But his phone, the work phone she was never to touch, had a code she'd known since he first got it, the founding year of his FinTech firm. His entire identity was wrapped up in that one number. The phone lit up, the home screen showing a dozen recent notifications, all from encrypted messaging apps she didn't use. She went straight to the banking apps. Her fingers moved with the practiced speed of someone who had managed finances for a decade. The joint checking account was, as expected, nearly empty. The savings account, the one marked future down payment, had a balance of $48. Solid, earned from her property management and freelance bookkeeping. Meticulously deposited every month, but the transfer history told a different story. One transaction, dated 5 days ago, stood out. ACH transfer out, $45. Memo. E. Hayes Capital Investment. Sarah gripped the phone so hard the screen almost cracked. The dread in her gut hardened into a cold, shocking certainty. He hadn't just talked about the future fund. He had emptied theirs. She opened the phone's browser and navigated to the internal employee portal for his firm. Accessing it was easier than it should have been. She'd memorized his login sequence after watching him do it 1,000 times. Under his portfolio, a link was visible. Private venture, Nova Labs. The page detailed a risky, early-stage investment he'd made with a third party. The co-investor was listed as C. Vance. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the strand of blonde hair on his suit jacket. C. Vance. That was Chloe, his 24-year-old executive assistant, who was rumored to manage half the firm's private deals. The burner phone, hidden under a stack of meaningless self-help business books on his nightstand, was easier to crack. No security. The recent text thread with Chloe was immediate and nauseating. Not overtly romantic, but deeply intimate in its professional collusion. Chloe, 10:24 p.m. Founders Day tomorrow. The Danner pitch is locked. Congrats on the transfer. That $45,000 is going to look like $450,000 by Q3. Ethan, 10:26 p.m. Only if deadweight doesn't notice. I told her I was networking. She's too focused on the properties and the peanuts to see the big play. I'll handle her tomorrow, quietly. The last sentence, I'll handle her tomorrow, quietly, felt less like text and more like a physical blow. The money wasn't the betrayal, the calculated, casual dismissal of her worth. Deadweight was the knife. She scrolled back through the months, finding receipts she hadn't seen, hotels near the firm's office, luxury dinners, and one charge for a $3 legal consultation from a firm specializing in asset protection for high-value individuals. It wasn't a secret investment. It was an exit strategy. And the gala wasn't a celebration of partnership. It was the final disposal. Sarah lowered the phone. The air in the room felt thin and toxic. She didn't cry. Crying would have been messy. And messy was inefficient. She went back to her laptop, pulled up her financial planning software, and with a clean, steady breath, she started pulling every single file marked joint and converting them to personal. She was no longer protecting their assets. She was protecting hers. The air in the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was thick with money, cologne, and the forced camaraderie of the Seattle FinTech elite. Every surface, from the mirrored bar to the polished marble floor, shimmered under the recessed lighting. reflecting the wealth and ambition packed inside. The atmosphere wasn't festive, it was competitive. Ethan Hayes looked magnificent. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment on the smallest rental unit. He looked like the dream he sold, confident, successful, and destined for greatness. He moved like he was already worth $1 billion. Sarah stood beside him, perfectly still. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, not the kind of flashy, look expensive dress Ethan had demanded, but something classic. The irony was heavy. She could have bought and sold half the people in the room, thanks to her quiet management of their assets. Yet she was being displayed as his supportive accessory. He steered her through the crowd, introducing her only as Sarah, then immediately pivoting back to discussing his trajectory with his colleagues. His hand rested heavily on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership, not affection. "Ah, the Danner Group," Ethan exclaimed, his smile wide and unnatural. "Marcus, good to see you. This is Sarah, my rock." Sarah offered a brief, polite nod to a group of men in their 50s. She could hear the clink of expensive champagne flutes. "The team at Danner," Ethan continued, not pausing for her to speak. "They really see the value in what I'm building. In my vision, it's not just a salary, right? It's legacy." One of the Danner principals, a man with a gold watch and tired eyes, murmured, "You've been incredibly supportive of his climb. Sarah, takes a lot to handle the home front while he's out here fighting the good fight." Supportive, the word tasted like dust. The moment came 20 minutes later, just as the CEO was about to take the stage for the keynote. Ethan pulled Sarah aside, into the shadow of a towering floral arrangement. "Look, babe, I need you to sign something. Quick." He produced a sleek, black leather folio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't divorce papers, not yet. It was something far more insulting. "It's just an asset protection agreement for the new funding round," he explained, his eyes darting toward the crowd. "Standard corporate risk management. My lawyer needed it immediately. Just a formality protecting the FinTech assets from, non-active investments." His voice was low, quick, and devoid of the easy confidence he'd shown moments before. He was nervous. The public nature of the act was the point. He was attempting to control her reaction using the pressure of the crowd. Sarah looked at the paper. It was an affidavit certifying that she had no claim to any of his FinTech venture assets, past or future, effectively separating her from the profits of the $45 she knew he'd stolen from their joint account. She looked up at him. His eyes weren't apologetic, they were expectant. He was watching for the sign of a scene, the tremor of a breakdown. He expected the deadweight to flinch. Sarah reached into her clutch and pulled out a fountain pen, an old, heavy Mont Blanc given to her by her grandfather. She looked at the line where her name was typed, Sarah Hayes, wife. She signed, her hand absolutely steady, not a flicker of hesitation in the downward stroke of the pen. The sound of the nib scratching against the expensive paper was the loudest noise in the ballroom. Ethan visibly relaxed. A small, relieved smirk played on his lips. "See? I knew you'd understand. You're the best, babe." He snatched the paper back, tucking it into his jacket pocket like a winning lottery ticket. He glanced toward the stage, then leaned in to kiss her cheek, a dry, professional peck. "I'm going to take a photo with the CEO. Don't move, just look supportive." And then he was gone, gliding toward the lights. Sarah stood alone by the wilting floral arrangement. She could feel the stares, a few pitying, most simply curious, absorbing the drama for later gossip. She didn't move for a long minute. Then, she reached out and pulled a perfectly arranged smoked salmon canapé from a passing server's tray. She lifted the tiny cracker to her lips, chewed slowly, and savored the expense. The taste of cold, smooth salmon, buttery and rich, was the first thing she'd truly felt all evening. She was no longer his supportive wife. She was a silent, well-informed predator who had just let her prey walk away, knowing he was already trapped. She had the facts, the transactions, and the code. Now, she had his signature. Sarah didn't go home. She took a rideshare to the nearest 24-hour business center in an industrial park. the smell of expensive champagne still clinging to her navy dress. The driver looked at her like she was the victim of a very chic, very late-night corporate incident. She sat at a rented computer. The Mont Blanc pen, now her only tangible asset from the night, resting beside the keyboard. The time for emotion was over. This was a checklist. First, the money. She knew the FinTech firm's direct deposit schedule. Ethan's next six-figure paycheck was scheduled to hit their joint account at 3 a.m. But before that, she had control over the equity he thought was secured. She opened the joint savings account online. The $48 he'd left as bait was still there. She initiated a transfer to her private, separately registered business account, the one he didn't know existed, titled only under her maiden name. Memo. E. Hayes. Refund for services rendered. 8 years of unpaid labor. The transfer was instant. His next paycheck would hit an empty shell of an account. Next, the foundation. The physical, inconvenient necessities of their life. She called the utility providers using the burner phone she'd found. She was the one listed on the accounts. Thanks to Ethan's garbage credit from his earlier startup failures. Yes, I need to schedule a service termination for the Seattle address. Effective 7 a.m. tomorrow. Water, gas, and electric. Ma'am, are you sure? The customer service voice was thick with late-night resignation. Completely sure, Sarah replied, her voice flat. I'm moving out. The new tenant is responsible for their own setup. The water and power, the quiet, assumed services of their affluent life, were gone. He would wake up in a cold, dark apartment with non-functioning plumbing. A subtle, yet inescapable panic. Then came the health insurance, the true American crisis. Ethan had rolled his individual plan under her high-quality coverage from her freelance group. Citing cost savings, a large chunk of his salary was subsidized through it. She accessed the benefits portal. Marriage dissolution was a qualifying life event. It took 5 minutes and the electronic upload of the asset protection affidavit she'd signed earlier, now serving a purpose Ethan hadn't intended. Processing termination of dependent coverage for Ethan Hayes. Effective immediately. She pictured him, suddenly facing the reality of the U.S. healthcare system without coverage. The pressure to maintain his high-stakes job, now magnified by the catastrophic risk of a single accident or illness. Finally, the master lock. The rental properties were controlled by a smart lock system she managed. She logged into the property manager console, changed the access codes to the small exterior shed where the tax and financial records, the real foundation of their wealth, were stored. She disabled his digital key and reactivated her own. Ethan had the penthouse dream. Sarah had the physical, literal keys to the kingdom. She walked out of the business center just as the sky began to lighten with that pre-dawn gray. She didn't drive home. Instead, she took an early morning ferry. Watching the lights of the Seattle skyline, Ethan's glittering, fragile city, recede behind the churning wake. The air was cold, clean, and free of cologne. In her purse, she carried a new cell phone, prepaid and untraceable, and in her heart, the knowledge that the dead weight had just stopped carrying him. Sarah drove east, away from the expensive humidity of the Pacific Northwest and into the vast, dry, mountainous expanse of Montana. She didn't stop until the gas light blinked and the GPS confirmed she was pulling into Missoula. Big enough to disappear into, small enough to feel like a community. She picked a college town for a reason: transient population, cheap short-term rentals, and no prying eyes on who came and went. The apartment she found was above a bookstore downtown. It had slanted floors, a perpetually whistling radiator, and a view of the rusted railroad tracks where the freight trains still made their mournful calls, a familiar, grounding sound. It was completely and utterly hers. She immediately enrolled in an evening Python coding certification class at the local community college. She wasn't starting over, she was upgrading. The bookkeeper who managed rental properties was becoming the data analyst who managed her own future. Her only point of contact with the past was her brother, Marcus. She hadn't called him, but she knew Ethan would. Marcus was fiercely loyal, a man who believed in sweat equity over venture capital, and she trusted him to keep the lie alive. Her prepaid burner phone buzzed 2 days later. An unlisted number. She answered with a simple, "Hello? Sarah? It's Marcus. Are you safe?" His voice was low and tight. "I'm fine. And yes, did he call?" "Call? He's been calling every hour since yesterday morning. Started on my house line. Then my cell. Then even called my work demanding your contact info. The man's lost his mind." Sarah pictured the scene. Ethan waking up to the silent apartment. The dead utilities. The empty bank account. And the realization that his health insurance, his safety net, was gone. The visual gave her a grim satisfaction. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you had a panic attack after the gala and left town to clear your head. Said you were staying with an old college professor. Possibly in Alaska. Somewhere cold, remote, and boring." Marcus paused. He actually cried. "Sarah said he made the biggest mistake of his life and needs you to come back to manage everything. But here's the kicker. The real reason he's frantic." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Tell me." "He was completely leveraged for that Danner pitch. He didn't just spend the $45,000 you told me about. He leveraged the rest of his portfolio, everything he had, into the Nova Labs deal. He was banking on the promotion, on the founder's valuation, and now the Nova Labs valuation is crashing." Marcus hesitated, the sound of static crackling between them. "He's facing a margin call. Sarah. He's got crushing venture debt that's about to liquidate everything he owns. He doesn't need his wife back. He needs his bookkeeper and his property manager to save his ass from the banks. He's telling everyone this is just an unfortunate corporate liquidation. But he's desperate." Sarah leaned against the cold radiator, closing her eyes. It wasn't about her worth, it was about his need. The betrayal wasn't about love, it was about servicing debt. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered. "Tell him I don't exist. Tell him I've become a park ranger. Anything. Just don't tell him where the trains whistle." She hung up and looked out the window. The Montana mountains were massive, silent, and indifferent to any man's venture debt. She picked up her Python textbook. The code was clean, logical, and it never lied. Life in Missoula settled into a rhythm defined by coding class, quiet nights, and the vast, unconcerned presence of the mountains. Sarah felt her focus return, fueled not by revenge, but by the clean logic of Python and the certainty of her own competence. She was building. 6 weeks after the move, the rhythm broke. She was in line at the local co-op grocery store, a brightly lit place that smelled of fresh bread and earthy vegetables, when her new, untraceable debit card was declined. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young cashier mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "It says there's a fraud alert, specifically flagged for unusual out-of-state activity." Sarah froze. She was paranoid about tracing. Having paid for everything in cash for the first month, the debit card was a necessary evil for the rent deposit. She called the bank immediately. The fraud department representative, polite and distant, informed her that a query had been placed on her recent transactions, originating from a high-level manager at her previous financial institution, citing a domestic asset investigation. The blood drained from Sarah's face. Ethan. He hadn't stopped at the tearful voicemails to Marcus. He was using his professional access, his hard-won FinTech status, to hunt her down. He wasn't looking for his wife. He was looking for a missing asset. Tracking her digital breadcrumbs like a forensic accountant. He had violated data privacy laws to find her. The violation felt sickeningly intimate. Far worse than the public betrayal. He was using the very system she had sacrificed to build him up. The next day, her paranoia was confirmed, as she walked across the quiet community college campus for her data structures class. A sleek, black sedan pulled up sharply to the curb. The window rolled down. Ethan Hayes, looking gaunt and severely stressed, was behind the wheel. His tailored suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt, the expensive cologne replaced by the stale anxiety of a cornered animal. "Sarah, thank God." He threw open the door. His movements erratic. "We need to talk, right now." She stopped 10 feet from the car, her spine rigid. "You violated a federal privacy statute to find me. Ethan, you used your FinTech credentials to track my card. That's illegal. He scoffed, adjusting his tie frantically. Don't be ridiculous. It's an inquiry. I'm a manager. I was checking on a missing asset from a high net worth divorce. The real problem is Nova Labs. I'm facing a margin call in 48 hours. I need access to the property equity. Sarah, I need you to sign over the management rights. I can pay off the debt, salvage the rest, and then you'll call me, dead weight, again? Sarah's voice was steady, cutting through his frantic energy. You don't need me, Ethan. You need my bookkeeping skills to service your debt. You don't care about the properties. You only care about the crushing venture debt you accrued behind my back. His eyes darted nervously to a student walking past. Marcus told you, he hissed. Look, if you help me, I can make this right. I'll give you double your cut from the properties. Just don't let the whole thing fall apart because you're being petty. Petty? She took a slow, deliberate step backward. You're facing criminal charges for corporate misconduct, stalking, and data breach, and you call my self-preservation petty. I'm done being your human ATM. Ethan. You have no idea the pressure I'm under, he yelled, finally losing control. I built this firm. I deserve this success. You had no right to walk away and take the foundation with you. Sarah watched him, the desperate, narcissistic performance playing out on a sleepy college campus. She didn't argue. She turned and walked away toward the main campus building, her pace even and measured. Sarah, don't you dare, he screamed, his voice echoing off the brick walls. You'll regret this. You'll regret ruining me. The threat, unlike the earlier ones, felt powerless. He was trapped in his suit, trapped by his car, trapped by the debt, and now, he had confirmed, on a recorded burner phone line Sarah had activated just before leaving the co-op, that he had used his professional access to find her. She had the evidence. Now, she needed the heavy artillery. Sarah didn't wait. The encounter on campus had stripped away the last layer of her hesitation. This wasn't about divorce or property disputes anymore. It was about safety and systemic justice. She walked straight to the office of Professor Walsh, the head of the community college's new data science program, a sharp, 50-something woman who had spent 2 decades in Silicon Valley legal tech before teaching. Professor Walsh listened, her expression moving from mild concern to grim professional intensity as Sarah played the recording from the previous day. He used his FinTech credentials to track my purchases across state lines. Sarah finished, her voice shaking with controlled anger. That's a felony. He accessed a financial system where he was a fiduciary to stalk a private citizen. Professor Walsh leaned back, steepled her hands, and nodded slowly. Ethan didn't just break the law. Sarah, he broke the trust of the entire financial system. You don't go to the police for this. You go to the regulator. She picked up the phone and made a single, precise call. Hello, this is Catherine Walsh, former counsel for Viridian Tech. I have a client who needs to file a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, regarding unauthorized use of proprietary financial data for personal surveillance. The name dropped, SEC, was far more dangerous than any divorce lawyer. It was the hammer of corporate justice. 2 days later, Sarah was in a sterile, windowless office in Helena, Montana, giving a sworn statement to a regional SEC investigator named Peterson. She laid out the evidence in clean, chronological order: the recorded threat, the text messages confirming the deadweight motive, the printouts of her bank's fraud alert, and the single, crucial document she had signed at the gala, the affidavit Ethan thought secured his assets. Miss Chen, Peterson said, his face impassive after reviewing the file. Your former husband used his position to commit an egregious data privacy violation. This isn't just unethical. If we confirm that he leveraged firm resources for this personal pursuit, he's looking at immediate suspension, termination, and potentially criminal referral. The investigator didn't promise justice, he promised due process. But for Sarah, due process meant his carefully constructed FinTech identity, the core of his self-worth, would be dismantled by the system he had worshipped. The final confrontation played out not on a quiet campus, but in the echoing glass lobby of the FinTech skyscraper in Seattle. captured on security footage. Professor Walsh had arranged for the official notice of suspension, pending the SEC investigation, to be delivered to Ethan at his office on a Tuesday morning. The suspension was effective immediately. Sarah watched the news break later that day, not on cable, but through a text message from Marcus. Marcus, 3:15 p.m. I'm at his building. Cops were called because he wouldn't leave. He's suspended. They walked him out in front of the whole floor. He was yelling about sabotage and petty revenge. Cops took him into custody for disorderly conduct. Ethan hadn't just lost his job, he'd lost his control, his decorum, and his entire audience. The ultimate public humiliation wasn't the gala where he'd called her dead weight. It was the shame of being escorted out of the temple he had built his life around. Sarah put her phone down on her coding textbook. She didn't feel triumph. She felt the heavy, final click of a door closing. She had reported a crime. And justice, clinical and cold, had been served. The foundation he had relied on, her silent labor, had crumbled. The rocket ship he had been riding had just run out of fuel. Part 8. The interest paid. 2 years later, the Montana sun was crisp and clean, reflecting off the fresh coat of paint on the tiny house Sarah now owned. It wasn't the glass condo of Ethan's dreams, it was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a porch and a yard large enough for a garden. Both her name and Leo's, a local architect, professor, were on the mortgage. Side by side, equal weight. Leo was in the yard, laughing as he wrestled a stubborn bag of topsoil. Their relationship wasn't a whirlwind, it was a slow, steady build, like the Python code Sarah now wrote for a consulting firm, or the meticulous blueprints Leo drew for historic renovations. There were no secrets, no hidden accounts, and the effort was always, demonstrably, 50-50. Morning, partner, Leo said, wiping sweat from his brow as he came inside, smelling of dirt and honest labor. Morning, Sarah replied, handing him a mug of coffee. Big day. Final plans for the kitchen remodel are due. They spread the blueprints across the worn kitchen table. The conversation wasn't about legacy or IPO. It was about cabinet depth and plumbing permits. It was simple, and it was perfect. The question of Ethan's fate was no longer a burning curiosity. It was merely background noise, filtered through the reliable relay of Marcus. Marcus, via text. Heard from Mom. Ethan's back in Portland. Got a low-level analyst job at a credit union. The kind of place where promotion means a bigger cubicle. Nova Labs collapsed, and he's living in a friend's spare room, trying to service the venture debt. Chloe left him 6 weeks after his suspension. Found a better rocket ship, I guess. Sarah read the text, not with glee, but with the cool detachment of a scientist observing a predictable outcome. He had prioritized the flashy penthouse over the foundation. And when the foundation walked away, the structure failed precisely as the physics dictated. Later that afternoon, Sarah stood on the deck, looking out at the mountains. She thought about the word, dead weight. He had meant her, the person holding him down. What he hadn't realized was that the dead weight was his debt, his insecurity, and his desperate need for an audience. She hadn't been the weight, she had been the unseen counterbalance. The meticulous force that kept his fragile tower from swaying in the corporate wind. When she removed herself, she didn't sink, she flew. She had built a life based on compound interest, small, steady, incremental gains in competence, peace, and love, accumulating value over time. Leo came up behind her, putting his arms around her waist. Penny for your thoughts? Just thinking about the past, she admitted, leaning back against his solid presence. About how I used to measure my worth by how much I sacrificed. Leo gently turned her to face him. Your worth isn't a measurement, Sarah, it's an absolute, that's the difference. He didn't ask about Ethan. He didn't need to. Ethan was irrelevant. The best revenge wasn't watching his life fall apart, though that was satisfying. In a clinical way, the best revenge was standing in this quiet, sturdy house, beside a man who saw her as a partner, not a prop, and realizing she was so completely, authentically happy that the man who broke her became nothing more than a footnote in her own success story. She wasn't flying, she was soaring. And the entire fee for the flight was paid by the man who had called her dead weight. Scene end. Voiceover, final, confident, and satisfied. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is best served financially, systematically, and with a clean conscience. If you made it this far, you know what it takes to rebuild. Hit the subscribe button and the bell, because your future deserves to be built on a foundation that lasts. The journey of Sarah Chen isn't just a dramatic story of betrayal and revenge. It's a critical lesson in financial and emotional self-worth that hits close to home for so many of us in the American grind. We're taught to sacrifice, to support the rocket ship partner, believing that our invisible labor is a shared investment. The cold truth revealed in this story is that when a partner calls you dead weight, they're not revealing your weakness. They're revealing that you were the irreplaceable foundation they desperately needed. The moment Sarah walked away, she didn't just end a marriage. She exposed the financial and professional fragility of a man who relied on her competence while dismissing her value. Her revenge wasn't loud or messy. It was compound interest, methodical, legal, and focused on systemic consequences. She used his own tools, financial systems and regulatory bodies, to dismantle the false identity he had built. The deepest takeaway is this: never let a partner's ambition overshadow your own equity. Your skills, whether managing properties, budgeting, or simply maintaining the household, are not peanuts, they are measurable. Tangible value. True partnership is built on equal weight and shared effort, not on one person carrying the other. When you realize the cost of carrying someone else's fragile dream, the greatest victory is simply setting that burden down and building a life where your worth is an absolute, not a calculation. If this story resonates with the quiet sacrifices you've made, share your thoughts or a moment of your own hard-won independence in the comments below. Stay strong and remember your value.